speak a little bit about my history and then go into how I became a breatharian, and then start looking at sun gazing and at the anatomy and physiology of actually how the body lives on prana and light. Okay, did that get interpreted? Okay, so I lived in Buffalo. Right now I'm in Phoenix, but I lived in Buffalo when I first started sun gazing. I had really debilitating seasonal affective disorder, because in Buffalo we generally don't see the sun from, say October, November until May. And so seasonal affective disorder is a real major issue there. So I went on the internet and was searching for cures for seasonal affective disorder, and found a woman in Toronto who had healed seasonal affective disorder by sun gazing. I really didn't know sun gazing at the time, but I figured anything that would really alleviate the seasonal affective disorder, I was willing to try, because it was quite debilitating. It'd be basically, I was really depressed. I couldn't get out of bed a lot of times and just had absolutely no energy. So I researched the sun gazing and then went on to actually start sun gazing. And this was April. There was still snow on the ground in Buffalo. And I went out and found the sun coming up and scraped the snow away, took off my shoes, and was standing barefoot on the frozen ground watching the sun. And there, then I counted to 10, which was the HRM protocol, and turned around and realized that I could still see and that I hadn't burned my eyes out, because the myth of burning your eyes out whenever you look at the sun was pretty strong. And so that didn't happen. I said, I like this. I like this a lot. That started my journey into doing sun gazing back in April of 2008. So I really stumbled into being a breatharian sort of by accident. It was really a result of starting to sun gaze to heal up the seasonal affective disorder. And gradually I started forgetting to eat. It was literally just days go by, and I just simply forgot to eat. And I look back at yesterday and the day before and the day before that, and I'd say, geez, I don't remember eating. I don't remember eating at all. And so then all of a sudden weeks would go by, and I would try to eat something, and all the food sort of tasted like cardboard. And I had absolutely no desire to eat or really deal with food whatsoever. So that was like in the middle to the end of 2008. And by the end of 2008, I had pretty much converted to just not eating and accepting the fact that I just had no interest in eating. I wasn't really losing any weight. I had plenty of energy. I was really quite creative. And I just continued on with that process and continued sun gazing daily in the morning and in the evening, the first hour and the last hour of the sun. So at the time, not many people were really sun gazing back then, especially in Buffalo. And all my friends had a great deal of concern that I was going to damage my eyes, were encouraging me to go to a doctor. And then when I stopped eating, the same thing happened. They were all concerned of me not eating at all. And so I just continued on with that because I just had no interest or desire to eat. See, because what happens when you sun gaze, is a picture of me. Is that picture coming through? Okay, it's a picture of me sun gazing at the on the shore of New Jersey. It's the Atlantic Ocean there, and see what happens when you sun gaze. The light starts to feed the mitochondria. So if we see, here's the visual pathway. Let me bring this up a little bit. This is the visual pathway. Here's the eyeball here, and this is the optic nerve coming through here. This lenticular nucleus, and then the visual cortex in the back of the brain here. And what happens when the light enters into the eyeballs, comes along the optic tract. This is the hypothalamus and the thalamus in here. And really the hunger issue is triggered by the hypothalamus, which is right here. So as the light comes through here, it starts to feed the hypothalamus, which eliminates the hunger issue. Then here's your thalamus, and these are really highly spiritual organs. It's part of the eye of Horus, the eye of Ra, and this whole limbic system in here has to do with a really high spiritual experiences. And so when you start sun gazing like that, that light goes right through here. You see, and the light actually feeds the mitochondria, which are the organelles, which convert supposedly food to energy. But this way, it cuts out the food and it feeds the mitochondria directly through the light. Which same thing goes on with prana, and when we get to prana nourishment, well, I'll get into that. So here's another shot of seeing here the light is coming in through the eyeball here, through the optic nerve or optic tract, back to the visual cortex back in here. Then the brain stem is like right around in here, going down the spinal column here. Seeing the optic nerve really is a cranial nerve, which most cranial nerves come out of the brain stem, but the optic nerve doesn't. It's a totally separate nerve, but it's an extension of the brain. And so you're feeding the brain as you sun gaze, goes through this whole optic tract, feeds the thalamus and hypothalamus, and all along this whole track, and then it feeds the visual cortex back in here. A picture of me sun gazing on the Jersey Shore. These are what are called chi generators, which I used to make these. They were based on mantras, and then I would put stones, essential oils, and flower essences in all that resonated with the mantra, and then that would enhance the mantra, and just holding them would bring the frequency of the mantra into your being. And these were mantras having to do with sun gazing and the powers of the sun, which there's 12 different mantras associated with the sun. See, the sun is really a clock. It's as it goes across the sky, it changes in frequency all the way through. Each minute by minute, the sun actually is going to change frequencies. And I've got all those frequencies figured out. And so when I sun gaze now, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll listen to the frequency of the sun that corresponds to the time that I'm sun gazing. See, and that really enhances the sun gazing. See, because sun gazing, there's a lot more to sun gazing than just not eating. It's like the sun is really our closest element that we can get actually to God. It's as close a representative of God as we have here on earth. And by sun gazing, we're actually tuning in to sun gazing, or I mean into God's reality. See, and what happens with that is the sun is, it's not really, we when we think of the solar system, we think of like the pie plate, the sun is in the middle, and then the planets are sort of on a plate going out this way, but that's not really what happens. It's really the sun is blasting through the universe at, a billion miles a second, and it's towing the planets behind it in sort of a cone-like system. Go ahead, you want to translate? Seeing it's a sort of like a cone back here, that here's the sun up here, and then the planets are spinning like this way behind it. And what's going on is that as the sun goes into new areas of the universe, the photons of the sun pick up the information that's prevalent in that part of the universe. And then when you sun gaze, that information gets transferred to you directly. And so what happens is, as the sun changes like that, it actually is the evolutionary process for humanity. Because what happens, the photons pick up the information and then it transfers it to sun gazing. And so you're way ahead of the curve or of most of humanity with the information that's coming into the earth that will be in the future part of our evolutionary process. And so you're at the head of that whole curve. And so what happens with that is you can just be ahead of the game, starting to plan things that are going to come into existence way in advance. That's one of the better things, interesting things about sun gazing, is that you do that. And a lot of when I get into the pranic things, you'll see I'm really reinterpreting the entire human body in terms of prana, rather than in terms of eating dead animals and dead plants. See, because we were really designed to process prana. We weren't really designed to process dead plants and dead animals. Is translation done? Okay. All right. Why don't you like take the mic away or something when you finish translating it, so I know that you're done, because I really can't hear you very much. Or just nod to me or say that you're done. Okay. So I really kind of reinterpreted the entire body in terms of processing prana, and that corresponds to the course that I have on pranic nutrition that you can get through me. Let me just bring up contact information for the tape. Oops. So this is my contact information. Here's my name. These are some of the credentials that I got. It's like I'm a registered polarity practitioner, a registered biodynamic cranial sacral therapist, a polarity therapist. And I studied bodywork for about 10 years and developed a whole series of things, and then had a series of 5 near-death experiences. So here's my email, dbrand1@gmail.com, and my Facebook groups are A Lifestyle Without Food and Frequency. And here's my website at harmonicsofhealing.org, And at Nimbit, you can download a lot of the different harmonics, which I have the whole body figured out from, I have the whole body figured out in terms of frequency, which what happened, I met this older woman in A Course in Miracles, and she kept asking me all these questions about my practice. And go ahead. And so this was back in the 90s, and in the United States, they would throw people like me in jail if I said the wrong thing, that I could cure something or something like that, because I wasn't a doctor. Only doctors can cure things. So as I finally asked her why she was asking me all these questions, and she said, well, my husband Al was the head physician at Buffalo General Hospital, and he would come home from after doing surgery all day. And he would say, you know, drugs and surgery really don't work. We just don't know what else to do. And when she heard what I was doing, she figured that that's what her husband was referring to, and she wanted to know everything about it. And so I live right by Niagara Falls, not right now, but back then. And we would go up to Niagara Falls and walk around a bit. And one day I said, you know, if you die first, why don't you help me from the other side? And if I die first, I'll help you from the other side. And she thought that was a great idea. And so in the meantime, I sort of moved down to Florida and was living in Florida for a little bit. And then I heard that she had died. And so I was sitting in Starbucks, drinking a cup of coffee, when all of a sudden all this information on harmonics started to flood in through my brain. And there was literally pressure on my head. Is this speed all right for you, or is it going too fast? Say what? I said there was pressure on the top of my head. And I had known about channeling, but I had never really been a channel. But it was all this information on harmonics was starting to come through me of different body parts associated to which harmonic, how to get into different dimensions. And I looked up and I said, who's doing this? Because I knew it had to be channeling, because I looked at the information and I really didn't know any of it, even though I was a classically trained musician. So all of a sudden I heard Joan's voice go off. Joan was the woman's name. And she said, well, it's me. She said, don't you remember? I'm just fulfilling our bargain. She said, this is how we heal on this side, and I've given it to you so you can heal and use it on your side. So that actually started the modality of harmonics of healing and how I figured out the entire, let's see. So, okay, yeah, got it. So I've had 5 near-death experiences, and when you have that number of near-death experiences, your life really probably isn't your own anymore. Your higher self starts coming through, and it starts leading your life rather than you leading your life. I said, after you've had that many near-death experiences, your higher self begins to run your life. And so a lot of the things that I do now really aren't my decisions, but it just is coming through directly from the higher self, including the whole Prana course. Okay. Um, so as see, so I really started becoming a breatharian in 2008, 2009, and I think around the end of 2017, it was becoming cloudy again in Buffalo, and so sun gazing was starting to wane. And I was familiar with the Pranic concept, and that a lot of people were talking about product nourishment. And so I started exploring pranic nourishment, or I say it's like I'm more directed to start looking into pranic nourishment, and really developed a whole concept of pranic nourishment. Let me share something here. Along the way, I actually studied quantum physics and string theory because that's and with in string theory, this is the construction of the universe. String theory and quantum physics. The important part here is, see, this is the unified field down here. This would be basically the scientific name for God. See, this is an energy field, and this is like where everything emerges from. See, and up here is actually physical reality. This is kind of where we're existing in through here. And all of these planes in through here are energetic realms. See, the important thing here is that this unified field splits into three fields here: yin, yang, and neutral, or sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic, from the Ayurvedic or from Oriental philosophy. And then it splits into the elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And then it further splits here into, I would say, 7 elements, which would be earth, water, fire, air, ether, plasma, and light. And those are really the building blocks of physical reality up here. You see, and in the universe, what happens, these elements condense down into what we call physical reality, which would be the stars and us and the planets and all that. And that's done here by the, this is the Orion Nebula, and there's a black hole back in here. I would surmise the black hole back in here. And that black hole is actually compressing the energetic 5 elements into the physicality that we recognize in the physical world. And the Orion Nebula is really the birthplace of stars, and there's more water coming out of the Orion Nebula or enough water comes out of the Orion Nebula to actually fill the oceans times per second. So you see, the important part here is that actually physical reality becomes compressed from the energetic 5 elements. If you remember the picture that I showed you, those elements are in the energetic realm. And what happens, they become compressed down in that black hole as they come through the Orion Nebula and then come out as actual stars and planets. So the same thing really happens in the physical body. We don't realize that because we've forced the body to eat dead plants and dead animals. And it really wasn't designed to do that. It was designed to process prana. So this is another picture of the Orion Nebula here. See, in these nebula, they're all through the universe, and they're creating what we know as the known universe. But in this section of the universe, it's usually the Orion Nebula that is actually producing that. And here's a picture of the hole, sort of, in the back of which would be the black hole that's actually compressing that. You see, and we believe, like black holes, there's not supposed to be anything that comes out of it, but that's not really accurate. This is more a picture of a black hole. You can see this is like pulling all the energy and light into it, but there's also a stream that comes out of it. And this would be the physical reality coming out of out of the black hole. So if we move on to the physical body, and apply that to the physical body, I started looking at the physical body and said, you know, there has to be some mechanism to actually absorb the prana. I mean, it to me, it didn't seem like it was really the lungs that were doing that. The lungs are in exchange for oxygen, but not necessarily in exchange for prana or absorption of prana. There had to be some other mechanism involved, and there is. And that mechanism basically is the sinuses here. These are the sinuses in through here. There's a whole bunch of them, but the ones that we're concerned with are these facial sinuses here. And then this is the earth sinus, the water sinus, fire, air, ether, and then the sphenoidal sinuses, which are here in this picture. They're like deep inside the head, absorb the plasma on one side and light on the other side. There's two sinuses in here. And if you see, these get clogged up usually from eating kind of dairy or mucus foods, which most of the cooked food is poisonous and mucus forming, and so that clogs all these up. See, and so the pranic system doesn't work for most people because it's just clogged up. Whereas when you start to detox or stop eating, all these things will start to clear out, and it'll be much easier to jump to prana rather than relying on dead plants and animals to eat. See, and these sinuses are directly connected to the esophagus going into the lungs, and they're all lined with respiratory cells similar to the lungs. See, and these are actually the pranic lungs. They will be the lungs that actually absorb the prana. Different shape and different positions of the sinuses actually attract and absorb the different ethers, the different pranas. So this is the right-hand side here. So this is the earth prana. So see, it's just an exercise. Everybody tried to breathe through that, and it's a conscious thing. It's not necessarily a physical thing because you're going to be breathing through your nose. We're going to put our awareness on this sinus here and think in terms of that you're breathing through that sinus. So let's do that a few times. And then once you complete that, move on to the water sinus here, which is just the opposite. So yeah, left-hand side. See, I started doing that, and right away, liquid started forming in my mouth, and I realized that I was on the right track for this. I said I started breathing through this sinus, and liquid started forming in my mouth, and so I realized that I was on the right track with this. So if you go up here, this is your fire sinus here, the fire element. So that's just above the earth on the right-hand side. And this you can actually use to warm yourself up if you're cold. Bring that fire element into the body. Here, the sinuses are behind the face, or behind the face, and they exist in the bones in the body, in the skull. See, medical people and scientists think that these are there to make the skull lighter. But actually what they are, they're the lungs for the pranic system. And then if you go down here to the sphenoidal sinuses are deep inside the head, and you can absorb the plasma. The plasma will be on the left-hand side, and the light will be on the right-hand side. So following this down, as I said, there are actually pathways going through the lungs. See, the lungs are actually, they're sort of like the storehouse of these different plasmas, or different pranas. So there's different lobes. There's actually 7 lobes on the lungs. Traditionally, they think that there's 5, but there are actually 2 smaller lobes. And if I pull up another picture here, see, there's a whole bunch of different segments to the lungs. And these segments actually absorb or are storehouses for the different prana. You can learn to differentiate the different lobes of the lungs. And this will be very important if you get sick. See, because what happens, the element needs to be healed before you can work with the condition. I said the element has to be healed before you can work with the actual condition of any illness. So actually working with these different pranas will actually be able to heal the element. Yes, see, these are the 7 elements that we have in the body that actually create physical reality. And so from the lungs, here's a picture of the whole respiratory system. And you can see here's the sinuses up and through here, coming down into the lungs here, and then segmenting all the way into the different lobes of the lungs. See, and then what happens, the heart is actually our black hole. Our heart, the heart here. See, because the heart compresses. Yeah, it's the heart compresses. And in that compression, what it's doing is it's compressing the elements, the energetic elements, into physical elements that the physical body can actually use. Are there any questions on any of that so far? Of the sinuses? Of the lungs, okay, yeah. No, I did.
I would like to know how long do you sun gaze every day, and if you directly gaze at the sun, and how long every day, or do you do it at sunrise or sunset? And
I do both. I do both sunrise and sunset. And I'll put in usually about 20 to 30 minutes each sunrise and sunset. Say what?
You look directly at the sun, right?
Yes, you're directly at the sun.
With your eyes open.
Yes, with my eyes open. Actually, both eyes open and eyes closed. Primarily eyes open in the morning, but then as the sun comes up, it becomes more difficult to sun gaze with your eyes open. And so I start sun gazing with my eyes closed. And that absorbs the infrared spectrum. And allows you to sun gaze for longer periods. Let's see.
Please, can you show us again the picture with the sinus and the elements?
The sinuses?
Yes.
See, this is really what's going on when people do pranayama or breathe pranically. They're really absorbing prana through these sinuses. They just don't realize the anatomy and physiology of it and think that they're absorbing it through the lungs, which they aren't really. These are the pranic lungs, is what I refer to them as.
Yeah. Did you say that if we sun gaze during the day, in other words, not sunrise and sunset, it's advisable to close our eyes?
At sunrise, everybody got that picture? Okay. Let's see. I usually do sunrise and sunsets with my eyes open for like about 45 minutes in the morning and 45 minutes at night. And then if I have the time, I'll start sun gazing with my eyes closed during the day, during the balance of the day. Seeing what happens, that actually allows you to start absorbing the infrared spectrum into the body, which is incredibly healing for the body.
Thank you.
Let's see. Yes. I think there's another question over there.
As I understood, when you breathe, you breathe with the consciousness of the different sinus, because we don't really know where they are, but with the conscious we can visualize them, and we start by one, and we breathe for each one, and we finish with the light and the plasma. This is right or not?
That's correct. It's a conscious thing.
Okay.
It's not necessarily physical,
Okay.
but it's more of a conscious exercise.
Thank you.
Yes, and you go through all of those, but you can also do it separately. So for instance, I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona, and it's in the middle of the desert. And it gets really, it's like it's 108 here today. A lot of times I'll wake up with a dry mouth and I'll just start breathing through that water sinus. And immediately saliva will start coming into my mouth. And I'll hydrate the body. So I really don't drink much water at all, or much food for that either. It's like if you see the universe doesn't eat, and we're part of the universe, so we don't really have to eat either. You just have to learn the process of actually how to do it, or how to not eat. See, we've been duped into eating. It's like the body wasn't designed to eat. And see, I'm almost 70 years old, and I've gone through many different diets. And invariably, no matter what diet you follow, people will tell you that you shouldn't eat those foods, that there's something wrong with those foods. So gradually, I became aware of the fact that all the food was toxic and poisonous. It's not just the wheat and dairy and animal products, but it's all food. You see, it's because we don't really come from the earth. We're really highly spiritually evolved people, and we weren't designed to eat dead animals, dead plants and dead animals. So we were designed to eat prana and light. It's just you have to learn how to do it to make it come off. That's what a lot of this conference is all about, is teaching people how to actually make the leap to prana. See, probably the easiest way to do that is through sun gazing. Because that just becomes automatic. It just, you develop not eating just as you're going along with sun gazing. It's just you lose interest in the food. See, as I was sun gazing back in 2008, it just, I literally forgot to eat. And at that time, I really didn't know anything about breatharianism or not eating, and I was concerned at first. And I would try to eat, but all the food tasted like cardboard. And so after a while, I just accepted the fact that I wasn't hungry and didn't really have to eat. And so I just continued on with that for really many years. And there were periods in there, like I had lived with a nutritionalist, a woman who was a nutritionalist. And she couldn't deal with the idea of not eating. So I ate while we were together. But then when the relationship broke off, I went back to solar nourishment. Because I enjoy solar nourishment a lot more than eating dead plants and dead animals. It's like being empty is a lot more desirable to me than actually having my full belly with dead animals or dead plants.
I have one question. You spoke about the heart like the black hole, and
Yeah.
is that mean that the energy can come from the heart? For example, when you meditate or something like that, like the light of the sun, but in your heart?
No, the heart, traditionally, the heart is supposed to be a pump,
Yeah.
and it's pumping blood through, I think it's 100,000 miles of blood vessels, which to me just seemed to be totally impossible. And so I started looking at other mechanisms that the heart could be. And I realized that it was a compressor. So you see here in this picture, these are all energies coming into the product lungs. This is all prana. This is separate, splitting the prana up into the different elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether, plasma, and light. See, and when it gets to the lungs, you need a picture of that. See, and then when it gets to the lungs, it's really still in the energetic realm. See, these are what I would call them the storehouses of the body. See, the plasma and the light, they're like smaller lobes, sort of on the back and the side. So it's like this is our earth lobe here, this is fire, this is ether, this is air, and this is water, and then the plasma is back behind here, and the light is back behind here. These actually store the prana until the body needs it. See, when the body needs any specific element, what it will do is it will actually communicate with the blood and tell the blood to go to these different lobes and pick up the element. So it goes to the lobe, it picks up the element, and then it brings it to the heart, which the heart is really a compressor. It's like a compressor.
Yes, thank you. I understand.
Well, I didn't understand that.
No, she just said she understood your explanation.
Okay, so the heart is a compressor. Let me come back. So the heart is the compressor, and it's actually compressing the energetic elements. Because remember, they're energetic from the sinuses to the lungs, and the blood comes in. The body communicates with the blood because the blood is conscious. It communicates with the blood to go to the different lobes and pick up the different elements, which there's an artery or a vein that goes from the heart to the lungs and then back to the heart. So it'll take that pulmonary artery, goes to the lungs, and it goes to the specific lobe, picks up the energetic prana that it's, and then it brings it back to the heart, where the heart compresses that energy into denser matter, which we call physicality. Yeah, and so then it's in the bloodstream, and then the bloodstream goes out and actually feeds the body. See, and part of it still stays in the energetic realm, and it actually feeds the mitochondria. See, the mitochondria are actually the organelles that actually are responsible for theoretically converting food to energy. And in this case, what goes on is it cuts out the middleman of the food, and the energy feeds the mitochondria directly. It's really so the same thing goes on with sun gazing, is the light actually feeds the mitochondria directly. See, and when that happens, you don't need to look externally for any sources of energy, because the body is fully nourished with energy from the sun and energy from prana. Let's see. Yeah, you see, because most illnesses are really food related. Said most illnesses are food related. And if you cut out the food, a lot of times you'll just eliminate a lot of the major illnesses. Seeing that just furthered the concept that we aren't really supposed to be eating. There's a lot of emotional attachment to food, but the limbic system that I showed in the beginning see, here's our limbic system here. This whole section in here is the limbic system, and the light is coming through here and is actually nullifying the whole limbic system as far as having its addiction to food. This is what's called the hypothalamus right here. And then this is the thalamus in here. And both of these are really responsible for the hunger issues that many people feel. And what happens as the light comes through here, it actually nullifies those hunger issues at the source. See, and the sinuses will be like around in here and here. And then the sphenoidal sinuses will be in here.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Yes. So we absorb the energy through the sunlight, but also all the time through our surrounding, right? So my question is, when we are in a place where there is a low, not much prana in the surrounding, or it's like a low energy, does this affect, or what do you have experience with that, or what would you recommend when we automatically absorb the prana of the surrounding to not absorb any lower? Do you know what I mean? Like,
I think I understood what you mean. And yeah, it would be like being in a forest or being in nature. We're going to find there's a lot more prana. And it's really easier to transition to prana and live on prana if you're living in like a forest or the outdoors a lot.
yes. So for the transition, you would highly recommend a natural place.
I didn't quite understand that. What was the question?
For the transition, would you highly recommend a nature place?
Yes,
Yes.
if you can.
And
I think
if you
that's
can't, what to do?
that's why Jasmine had such a hard time when they were studying her.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely understand.
She was locked in a hotel room where there really wasn't any prana. Yeah, and so that's one of the reasons why I always turn down people studying me, doctors and scientists.
Yeah.
See, because they have a total different parameter. So the parameter is over here based on eating dead plants and animals, and my parameter is here on light and living on prana. And I only met one doctor that even understands the concept of sun gazing. Most of them just dismiss it.
Yeah.
See, and so it's like they're so indoctrinated into their own paradigm. I said they're so indoctrinated into their own paradigm that it's really impossible to get through to most of them. So I found it's more like a grassroots effort. Of things like this festival and talking to small groups. And explaining to them basically how the whole system works, one person at a time, how to make the transition if they're interested. And as more and more people become aware of the toxicity of the food, and also as the population gets older, it's the food becomes less and less bioavailable. You see, and it's for more and more people, food just doesn't work. It's when you're young, you have a concrete or a really strong digestive system. And then as you get older and things, it becomes obvious that certain things just don't work. So they start looking for alternatives, and pranic living and sun gazing are really two of the alternatives that more and more people are transitioning to. Okay, so any other questions on anything?
Yes, still to the same subject. Do you have a recommendation when we have to be in a place where there is a low prana energy, what we can do?
Well, optimal would be living in nature.
Yes. But if we have to travel for some days or like
I used to travel. I was living in New Jersey, and I used to drive an hour to get to the seashore every morning before sunrise.
Okay. So really prioritize that and look for ways to
Yes.
To do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
If you really want to make the transition to being a vegetarian, you have to prioritize these things, because they aren't going to just naturally happen. It's like the addiction of food is just too strong. See, because food is really just an addiction, same as alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes.
Hello?
A lot of sun gazing is about breaking the addiction. See, the sun is pure light. And when you sun gaze, you're bringing that full frequency into the body. And it raises your vibration. And as your vibration raises, you'll start finding that your diet will change significantly until you get to a point where you just aren't interested in eating at all. See, and that's traditionally they think it takes 9 months, but I found it took much less than that. It was really quite a rapid transition for me, because I've been doing harmonics of healing for so long that most of the energy channels were wide open in me, so the light could travel through the body. And it just transformed me really quite rapidly. I think the gentleman in the back, do you have a question?
Yeah. May I know the name you prefer to be called with? Because I've heard few names and I'm not sure what you prefer.
I didn't quite understand that.
Your name? What do you prefer to be called with?
You want my name and contact information?
No, just your name. What do you prefer to be called with?
Oh, Darrell Brann.
What's that?
Darrell Brann.
Darrell, okay. Right, Mr. Darrell. What about sun gazing close, like to the sea? Is that very good?
Sun gazing by the ocean, is that what you mean?
Yeah, the sea or the ocean, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably one of the best places because there are no buildings or trees to obstruct your view.
Great. Second thing, I understand that you're going to take a group with you to Egypt, month of November.
Well, that didn't come through very well. Could you repeat that?
I understand. Somebody told me you're going to take a group to do Breatharian or sun gazing. I'm not sure. In Egypt.
That wasn't my plan. I've played with the idea of creating a healing place called Heliopolis
I live there.
and teaching sun gazing and pranic breathing and how to make the transition to pranic living and solar nutrition, as well as healing a lot of the illnesses. Because I was trained as a healer, and I've got 20, 30 years of doing healing experience in the United States here.
So are you going to take people to Egypt to do this process? I'm asking because I'm Egyptian.
It wasn't my intention. It never really crossed my mind to go to Egypt.
Okay.
So, no.
Thank you.
You may have me confused with somebody else, but
Yeah.
it wasn't me.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Any other questions on anything?
You started to speak when you were channeled by Samantha. And after you stopped, you didn't continue.
I didn't understand that. Could you?
The dead woman. Joan, sorry. So you start to speak about the first time you feel Joan speaking to you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she has moved on since then, but there's another group in that spiritual hierarchy that are channeling things to me. And the whole prana course that I showed, the whole pranic lungs and the whole element thing that I had showed previously, that all came from that higher dimension.
Nice.
I think one of the purposes of me being here is to actually bring through information like that for the benefit of humanity. Which I have focused on jumping to prana that you can get through me.
You are jumping to prana?
I said I have a whole course developed around the system that I was displaying with the pranic lungs and the heart and actually the whole body to actually teach people how to jump to prana.
We can find it on your website, this course?
You can contact me join the Facebook group about food or frequency, and tell me that you're interested in the Prana course, and I can send you the details of that.
Thank you very much.
So I have another question. Can you tell more about your healer system? You spoke about harmonics healing, so can you explain a little bit about that? Ho chiesto quale, se può spiegare il suo sistema di guarigione, appunto
Sure.
healing harmonics, quindi armonici che guariscono. Could you please show us again your contacts? Okay, Darrell, we have two more questions. These questions I've done before about your healing technique, and then we have another one.
Yeah, so I spent probably 20 years traveling coast to coast, working, speaking, and teaching. That you see, the human body is really tuned to different frequencies. And Joan actually transmitted a lot of that to me. And you see, the frequencies of the body become detuned or untuned. And that translates into illness. And what you need to do is listen to the correct frequency, and a lot of times it will put the body back together. See, because we're really just energy, and energy is a frequency. And in the case of the body, the different organs and different tissues and different functions, and the different functions all have a different frequency. And if you know those frequencies, you can actually heal the body at very deep levels. Yeah, and that's what Joan transmitted to me. See, and she moved on into other realms.
Sorry, could you repeat last sentence?
I said she moved on to other realms. She died and moved on. She died, she transmitted that stuff to me, and then in the process of the 20 years since she died, she has since moved on, but there's a whole spiritual hierarchy that are actually transmitting things to me.
When you speak about frequencies, they are asking, what do you mean, frequencies of color or sound?
Well, frequencies of, I deal with sound, but it's just a lower octave from light. So there have been people that have been dealing with light and sound for a long time. It's just I'm very, very specific about it. Like I can play your left eye, your right eye, or your left ear, or right ear, or the different, the hypothalamus or the thalamus. I've got all that figured out, as well as I figured out the periodic table, and I can give you the frequency of all the platinum group of elements.
Okay, so we have another question, which is okay. They are saying that you actually didn't answer to this question about the color and or sound.
Yeah, sound and light are really just different octaves.
They are different.
They're different octaves. They're basically the same thing. They're just different octaves apart. And I just, as a musician, I was just focused on sound. Because I've been a musician my whole life.
So is our friend is saying that he's also a musician, and he would like to know which frequency you're talking about. So to be che sia preciso su che frequenza. So you are talking about a specific frequency of a certain note.
They're specific frequencies, but they're harmonics. See, this is my harmonic generator. It's called the Lambdoma keyboard. And these are all different harmonics. This would be your bass note here. And then going up here would be overtones. And going up here would be undertones.
Sorry, could you repeat the last sentence?
I said this would be your bass note, or what is it?
No. Are you showing an image? We are not seeing it.
How's that? Yeah, so this is a Lambdoma keyboard, and this is what I use to generate harmonics, because the body is tuned to harmonics. And this would be your keynote or your tonic, which you can change this to 1,000th of a hertz, and then that changes the whole matrix. And this matrix is really, these frequencies are really the body.
You did it by yourself?
Well, it was transferred to me, but I did it all myself, yeah. You see, let me. So here's a traditional chakra system. You see in these petals here, petals on the chakras, if you look at any picture of a chakra, you'll see the petals that surround it. And there's actually 50 of them going from the root chakra up to the sixth chakra. And those are actually the template for the human body.
Sorry, that's a template for?
It's a template for the human body. See, and what I did is basically figured out, or John gave me the frequencies for this different template of all the different chakra petals. Seeing if you play the petal, like for instance, this petal here is for the right eye. And so if you're having right eye problems, you can play that petal, and a lot of times it will clear up the eye issue. Or if we go down, it's like these in here on the left and right ear. If you play those, you can start to heal up any kind of hearing issues. See, I have all the cranial nerves and all the acupuncture meridians all figured out. As well as most of the organs and the functions of the body. Yeah, it took 20 years really to do it completely, but I pretty much have the body figured out now. See, and I would go back and forth from California to New York or in Buffalo, and I developed a whole circuit. And I would just go back and forth teaching and speaking and working on people as I went along. And I was developing this whole concept of harmonics of healing more and more.
So they were asking if there is a scientific evidence of what you were explaining before about the sinuses and the lungs and the elements.
I didn't quite understand that. Could you go over it once more?
Is there a scientific evidence of what you were explaining before about the sinuses that they absorb the prana, about the relationship between the sinuses and the elements, and the same with the lungs? And the same also if there is scientific evidence of your explanation of the heart and its function and functioning.
I would say no.
So what? Just one moment that I say again in Italian.
What I would say is that if we relied on the just scientific validation, we really wouldn't do any kind of progressing. Because it's a very rigid system. And when you start sun gazing, as I said, you're on the cutting edge of evolution and where the culture is going to. Which our culture is heading more and more into solar and pranic nutrition. And so people like me start to interpret how are you actually going to do it, and explaining to people in more depth how you can actually make the transition. Yeah, which I have more and more followers following me with it. because I'm not towing the line, the scientific line. I don't find any much material at all that really supports what I just said. As I said, it's really all just channeled material, and it works. I mean, that's the key here. Does it work or does it not work? If it doesn't work, I don't do it. But if it works, I go with it. You know, I've been going coast to coast doing healing work using sound therapy for 20 years. And I've only met one doctor that understands the concept of sound therapy. In the same fashion, I've only met two doctors that even have heard of sun gazing and that have understood solar nutrition.
Sorry, could you repeat? We couldn't hear because there was a sound. About doctors and sun gazing.
I said I've only met a couple doctors that have a concept of sun gazing or solar nutrition. Most think it's impossible. So they're the ones that usually control what's written about this stuff. Any kind of scientific evidence. So you're not going to find it. It's just try it and see if it works. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, that's fine too. Usually I find that it does work.
Can you let us hear to your harmonic tool? Do you hear me?
You want me to listen to somebody?
Can you let us hear to your harmonic tool?
Yeah, I have some on my phone. I don't know if that's coming through at all.
Yeah.
See, I have a lot of them programmed in my phone, and what I use is a harmonic dual function harmonic generator, a frequency generator, and I just plug the frequencies into this. Here are the different frequencies here, and then I'll just play them, and it just goes on forever. So I have all the frequencies figured out for the, let's say, the acupuncture meridians, or the cranial nerves, or the eyes, or the ears, and nose, all the different functions. I have the whole brain figured out, and if I'm having problems with any of that, I'll plug the frequencies of that into here, play that, and that will change the energy system. And once the energy system changes, that will transfer it into the physical body given time. Sometimes takes a little while, but it always does it. See, because the energy system is actually what controls the physical body.
Genial.
Yeah, it's a little bit louder sound. See, those would be the frequencies.
We have another question about sun gazing. If you recommend to start gradually, or one can start even by sun gazing for 20 minutes?
You start with 10 seconds and build up 10 seconds a day. And you limit sun gazing to the first hour and last hour of the sun. And also you're supposed to do it barefoot to complete the circuit of the complete the circuit into the earth. Because there's a lot of frequencies that actually come up from the earth. See, and according to Madame Blavatsky, we actually came here to raise the frequency of the earth.
Sorry, could you repeat?
I said, according to Madame Blavatsky, we came here to raise the frequency of the earth. And we can do that through sun gazing. That's why you do barefoot, so that the sun actually goes through the body as like a transformer. Steps down from low frequency into more physical, denser elements that the earth can use. You see, and that has been going on. If you look at some of the material out there, it's like the human resonance is increasing. And the whole pranic nourishment, solar nourishment, is really becoming much easier because we're entering into what's called the photon belt in the universe. So there's just more light that's available. There's more light, and light is information. Because photons carry information. They're information carriers. So the photons pick up the information, and then they transfer it to the human body if you're sun gazing. Traditionally, what would happen is that the sun would feed the plants and transfer the ideas into the plants, then the animals would eat the plants, and then we eat the animals. So the evolutionary process would be way down the line. Whereas when you start sun gazing, you sort of come up to the front of the line and you absorb the evolutionary force right when it first starts. Okay, so we've got 10 minutes. Are there any other questions?
The last sound we heard was very unpleasant. What was it for?
What was what for?
Could you repeat? What?
Said what? What was what? She
The
asked what was
sound
something.
we heard a sound, the last sound that you let us hear. She's saying it was very unpleasant. At least like here it sounded in this way from the computer, and so she's asking what it was meant for.
That one? Yeah, this is for the 11th chakra and the spleen meridian. The 11th chakra and the spleen meridian. See, my Kundalini came up many years ago. And what happens when your Kundalini comes up, the original 7 chakras here in the body descend, and the upper chakras come down into the body, and you start living off of these upper chakras. You start living 6 through 12 instead of 1 through 7. So I have the whole Pranic course available through me. You can just contact me at my contact information if you're interested in that, and it's online. I just send you I'll send you the frequencies as well as the course, and you can use the frequencies of the different elements to find the different sinuses and different things in the organs, and then you can actually start to work with that.
Could we hear do you have the frequency of the heart meridian? Could we listen now to the heart?
I didn't really understand that.
Do you have available right now the frequency of the heart meridian?
Frequency of the heart?
Yes.
Let me see.
But maybe through the transmission, through the phone and the Skype and the computer, it will not be that pure what we hear here. No?
So that's the heart chakra, which is the energetic thing. The energetic, it's right here. And what we'll do, that energetically, that controls the heart.
Is it 440 hertz or 432? What is your opinion about the tuning on 440 and 432?
The heart chakra frequency is 364.5 hertz.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm in your Facebook group, so probably I will contact you there.
The Facebook groups are A Lifestyle Without Food.
Yes, I'm in there already. You have another one?
Frequency.
Okay.
What was the question?
No, I said I'm already in the group Lifestyle Without Food,
Oh,
so probably I will contact you there because the whole thing is very interesting and we could talk for an hour now.
Yeah, I found it very interesting too. That's why I pursued it the way I have. It's been a lifelong pursuit for me, really.
Thank you so much for
sharing. I think that's a big reason why I've come to the Earth, is to actually start to transmit some of this information, the harmonics and stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, we're done.
Kind of complicated material, but I hope I explained it sufficiently.
Yes, thank you. C'était un peu compliqué, mais j'espère que je vous ai bien expliqué.
So anything else? We have just a couple minutes left.
So if one wants to follow what your advice, one can do it by himself, or is it good to have some guidance, somebody who help you in the process?
Well, I make myself available to work with people as a therapist because I've been trained as a therapist. And now instead of doing it in person, I just do that over the internet. And I'll recommend frequencies or send people frequencies that they can work with. That's basically how I make my living. I sell the frequencies for $15 a frequency.
And okay, he's also asking about the sun gazing. So if one can do, se uno può fare sun gazing da sé. So sun gazing can be done by oneself? Just, you know, starting by oneself?
Research it fully on the internet. Probably the most common method is the HRM method. HRM, Hara Ratan Mantak, I think his name is. He's an Indian who brought sun gazing to the United States, and he has a whole method designed. And if you read that, it will give you the sufficient knowledge that you need to start sun gazing.
Thank you.
Well, there's a few different methods out there, but his is probably the most popular. Okay, anything else? We got 60 seconds left.
Well, thank you very much, Darrell, for being with us.
Thank you for hanging in there with me.
Thank you. Sending you love.
All right, have a good time in Italy.
Thank you very much.
Okay.